Step back now.
I am a U.S. Marshal.
Hands visible.
On what grounds?
Turn around.
You're making a mistake.
This officer will lose his badge before the week is over. He will lose his job before the month ends. And before the civil dust settles, taxpayers will write a check so large it will end careers far above his rank. $11 million to pay for a moment of ego he refused to surrender. The tragedy isn't that this was unpredictable. It's that every warning sign was flashing, and he ignored them all. The courthouse is supposed to be a neutral ground, a place where authority is balanced, restrained, layered. But for this officer, standing just feet from the metal detectors, neutrality feels like weakness. And weakness is something his ego cannot tolerate. The man approaching him doesn't raise his voice, doesn't posture, doesn't rush. The U.S. Marshal moves with practiced calm, credentials already in hand, body language unshakable. He has spent years navigating volatile rooms without escalating them. His power isn't loud. It's institutional, quiet, backed by federal statute and an understanding of how fragile authority becomes when it's misused. That calm lands like an insult. The officer's jaw tightens, not because he's threatened, but because his control has been questioned. And this is the first dangerous moment for his career. He interprets professionalism as defiance. "Sir, step back." It's not a request. It's a test. The marshal doesn't flinch. He states who he is, not aggressively, not submissively, just factual, the kind of clarity that should end a confrontation. Instead, it feeds the fire. The officer steps closer, shrinking the space. This is not about safety anymore. This is about dominance, about reminding everyone within earshot who controls this doorway. In his mind, hierarchy must be enforced, even when it doesn't exist. Every 45 seconds like this matters, because policy doesn't destroy careers. Patterns do, and this pattern is already forming. The marshal asks for a badge number, a procedural request, calm, legal. The officer hears it as a challenge. Hands where I can see them. This is the pivot point, the moment arrogance hardens into action. The officer has now escalated without cause, and he doesn't realize that every syllable is being recorded, time-stamped, and weighed by people who will never care about his tone, only his judgment. The marshal's voice lowers, not in fear, in warning. "You're making a mistake." He's not threatening. He's offering an exit ramp. The officer refuses it. There's something predatory in how quickly authority turns physical. The command to turn around isn't backed by probable cause. It's backed by irritation, insolence, a belief that compliance is owed, not earned. This is the second career danger moment, an unlawful order issued publicly. Once an officer commits to it, backing down becomes psychologically impossible. Ego won't allow it. The marshal's dignity becomes a weapon. "I am not resisting." 4 words, calm, clean, designed to survive in court. The officer doesn't hear them. His mind is racing ahead, already justifying force that hasn't happened yet. He reaches for control, because control is slipping. The cuffs come out, and with them, the invisible line is crossed. In that instant, the power dynamic flips. The marshal is no longer just a man at a door. He's a federal official being detained without legal basis. Every second that follows compounds liability, not just for this officer, but for the department standing behind him. This is why this moment is lethal to a career. Federal authority does not argue on the sidewalk. It documents. The marshal goes to his knees when ordered. Not because he has to, but because compliance now exposes the abuse. His calm is surgical. Each movement says the same thing. I know exactly how this ends. Around them, the atmosphere changes. Other officers hesitate. No one intervenes. Silence becomes complicity. The officer doubles down. "Stop resisting." A lie spoken out of necessity. The report is already being written in his head. And that's the third fatal error. Once an officer narrates fiction, reality becomes the enemy. The marshal asks for a supervisor. That request is devastating, because supervisors don't just bring rank, they bring perspective, and perspective is lethal to unchecked ego. The officer hesitates for half a second too long. You can almost feel it, the realization trying to surface, the awareness that this is bigger than pride, but arrogance is faster than wisdom. I am the supervisor. A statement meant to end the conversation. Instead, it seals his fate, because now there is no buffer, no one to correct course, no one to quietly diffuse what is rapidly becoming a federal incident. The isolation is complete. This is the final dangerous moment of Part 1, when an officer places himself above correction. That's when institutions step in. Somewhere a radio crackles, a call goes out. Not loudly, not dramatically, but officially. And as that signal travels upward, through chains of command, through federal offices, through legal departments, the officer is still standing there, convinced he has won. He hasn't realized yet that the clock has started, and it will not stop. By the time the supervisor arrives, the damage is already irreversible, not because of what happens next, but because of what has already been captured. The marshal remains on his knees, hands cuffed behind his back, posture straight, expression controlled. This is not humiliation, it's strategy. Every second he stays calm sharpens the contrast. Every breath he takes without protest deepens the officer's exposure. This is why this moment is dangerous for the officer's career. Composure under restraint is devastating evidence. The supervisor doesn't rush in shouting. He walks. Measured, alert. He takes in the scene in seconds. The cuffs, the location, the absence of struggle, the unmistakable insignia on the marshal's belt that should never be ignored. Why is he detained? It's a simple question. It lands like a trap. The officer answers too fast. Failure to comply. Disorderly conduct. The words sound rehearsed, defensive. They're not meant to explain, they're meant to justify. And justification is what officers reach for when instinct tells them something has gone wrong. The supervisor turns to the marshal. Sir? The marshal looks up slowly. No sarcasm, no accusation. I identified myself, I presented credentials, I was detained anyway. That's it. No embellishment, no emotion, just facts. This is the fourth career-ending moment, when narratives collide, and one of them doesn't need to be loud to be believed. The supervisor asks to see the credentials. The cuffs come off, not dramatically, but reluctantly. The metal clicks are almost apologetic. The moment the credentials are read, the atmosphere shifts. It's subtle, but unmistakable. The officer who initiated the arrest steps back half a pace. His authority drains, replaced by calculation. He is now running scenarios in his head. Internal review, suspension, administrative leave. But he still doesn't apologize. That matters. Because departments forgive mistakes. They do not forgive defiance after clarity. The marshal stands, rolls his shoulders once, regains physical space without asserting it. He doesn't threaten, he doesn't warn, he simply says, I'll be filing a report. That sentence carries more weight than any arrest command ever could. Within hours, emails will circulate, not angry ones, formal ones, subject lines that sound harmless but end careers. Words like incident, review, federal inquiry. This is why this moment is fatal to the officer's future. Federal complaints don't fade, they metastasize. Bodycam footage is pulled, not just his, but everyone's. Audio is isolated, transcripts are created, phrases like, "You don't outrank me here," are replayed in rooms where no one cares about tone, only legality. The officer will insist it was a misunderstanding, that he felt threatened, that he was maintaining security. But the footage tells a colder story. It shows a calm subject, clear identification, escalation without cause, commands without basis. And most damning of all, no attempt to de-escalate. Internal Affairs doesn't ask why he felt disrespected. They ask why he ignored procedure. That distinction destroys him. Weeks later, the suspension becomes termination. Quiet, administrative, no press conference, no defense from the department, just a statement about policy violations and failure to exercise sound judgment. The officer will tell friends he was thrown under the bus. But the truth is harsher. The bus never moved. He stepped in front of it. Then comes the lawsuit. Not emotional, not vindictive, surgical. The complaint lays out the timeline with precision. Federal credentials ignored, unlawful detention, public humiliation, constitutional violations, each paragraph tighter than the last. Depositions follow. This is where arrogance finally collapses. Under oath, bravado evaporates. There's no room for tone or posture, just questions, clear ones, repeated ones. Where in policy does it say you may detain a federal marshal without cause? Why did you escalate after credentials were shown? Why did you claim resistance when none is visible on footage? Silence becomes his loudest answer. Supervisors testify. Training officers testify. Experts testify. And then the city settles. $11 million. Not because they want to, but because they can't win. This is the final, irreversible cost of that moment at the door. Arrogance is expensive when it's recorded. The marshal returns to work. His career intact. Reputation strengthened. Calm validated. The officer does not. He applies elsewhere. His record follows him. Departments hesitate. Background checks stall. The job he once believed was untouchable becomes unreachable, all from a single interaction that could have ended in 5 seconds. With respect. And that is the real lesson buried in this body cam footage. Not that power corrupts, but that unchecked ego leaves fingerprints everywhere, especially on tape. The payout makes headlines, but it doesn't end the story. It never does. Because the most dangerous consequences don't arrive with cameras or press releases. They arrive quietly, months later, when the officer realizes the uniform no longer opens doors, when old colleagues stop returning calls, when interviews end with polite smiles and no follow-up. This is where arrogance finally meets its echo. The officer replays the moment in his head endlessly. Not the cuffs, not the supervisor. The sentence that haunts him is smaller. You don't outrank me here. That was the fracture. Because in law enforcement, rank is temporary, but judgment is permanent. And his judgment was exposed in the most unforgiving way possible, against someone who knew exactly how to let him destroy himself. The internal review file grows thick, not just with this incident, but with context, prior complaints, informal warnings, moments once dismissed as attitude, now reclassified as pattern. This is why that courthouse moment mattered so much. It unlocked the past. The department never says it publicly, but internally, the narrative shifts. This wasn't an isolated mistake. It was the inevitable outcome of an ego that had been indulged too long. Training memos change. Briefings include anonymized clips, his voice distorted, his name removed, but the lesson unmistakable. New recruits watch and are told what not to become. Authority without restraint is liability. Meanwhile, the marshal testifies before a committee, calm, precise, unemotional. He doesn't attack the officer. He doesn't need to. He talks about dignity, about restraint, about how power should look when it's done right. That contrast lands harder than any accusation. This is another career-ending truth for the officer. The victim never had to raise his voice. The lawsuit money is allocated. Training budgets, policy reforms. Settlements always wear disguises like improvement and accountability. But everyone inside the system knows the real cost isn't financial. It's trust. And trust, once broken, doesn't settle. It disappears. Years later, the footage still circulates. Not online, in classrooms, in command staff meetings, in legal seminars. A case study in how fast authority can rot when it's fed by pride instead of discipline. The officer becomes a cautionary tale without a name, and that's the final punishment. No redemption arc, no public apology tour, just quiet erasure. Because in the end, his downfall wasn't caused by a federal marshal, a lawsuit, or a supervisor walking in at the wrong moment. It was caused by a single belief he refused to question. That respect is something you can demand. The body cam proves otherwise, and it always will.